guys, what I do, another video for you guys start talking all things soaps. So, what has been my favourite soap since the start of the year? I would have to give that award to EastEnders. I think EastEnders since the start of this year has absolutely smashed it. I don't think there's been a time this year where I've actually missed, any EastEnders episodes. That's the only real soap now that I actually watch. Going back, 4 or 5 years ago, I used to be watching, the Horry and emmerdale, Coronation Street and emmerdale episodes all the time. There was very rarely a time where I actually missed an episode of Coronation Street or emmerdale. I always used to be quite gutted if I had to miss an episode of Horror emmerdale, but now, I find myself very rarely watching horror or emmerdale. The only time I've watched a full week of horror episodes this year, well, twice, was obviously when the week that Ray Tinton was killed off, and a couple of weeks before that, in the week when Julie Harp was killed off. Those are the only two times I've actually watched a full week of horror episodes. And with emmerdale, I watched a full week of episodes when they did the Who Killed Anthony Fox storyline. And I also watched the full week of episodes when they did the limo crash, which I think, if I remember correctly, kind of coincided with the EastEnders 40th anniversary week. But I feel like the EastEnders 40th anniversary week was a little bit better than the emmerdale late stump. To be fair, I mean EastEnders, I think this year has definitely 100% been better than emmerdale and Coronation Street by a landslide. Coronation Street and emmerdale, for me, they've been a little bit lackluster this year. Which is why I didn't particularly disagree with EastEnders winning Best Soap at this year's British Soap Awards, because I think EastEnders really deserved that. I do think that they maybe did win some awards that other shows should have won. I do think that, but I certainly don't disagree with them winning the British Soap Awards. Like, why would I have an issue with them winning an award that I feel that they deserve to win? I 100% think that they deserve to win that award. To be honest, if Horry or Emmerdale had won that Best Soap Award, I would have been right pissed off, because neither show has actually shown that they deserve to win it. When was the last time that Horry and Emmerdale were actually top quality? I feel like it's been a few years now since Horry and Emmerdale were at their very best. I think the problem with Horry, I think the thing that's had such a huge impact on Horry and Emmerdale is the fact that so many cast members have been axed by both shows since the start of the year. We've seen quite a few names axed by Coronation Street. Some which the door's been left open for them to return. Some of which haven't. Some of which the door has not been left open for them to return. One of those being Ray Tinker, which is one that I was quite surprised about. I thought they would leave the door open for him to return, and I'm quite surprised they didn't do that. But obviously they've left the door open for Yasmin to return. They've left the doors open for obviously Eileen and obviously Alan Worth and obviously Sue Eva to return. If they ever wanted to return for guest appearances. I'm surprised that Sue Nichols has lasted as long as she has. But I thought she'd quit the show a few months ago. I didn't see her last year. I honestly didn't think she would last too long, especially after it was announced that Helen Worth was leaving as well. I thought, yeah, that's it. Once Helen Worth leaves, it won't be too long before Sue Nichols leaves. I honestly didn't think that, but I think the problem with for me with Coronation Street, I feel like I've had to stop watching the show because I found it to be too depressing especially since the start of this year. I feel like the show has been way too depressing, and I just feel like there's been way too much doom and gloom, with Coronation Street since the start of the year. Like, we've had we've had characters being murdered, characters dying of cancer, we've had Kevin Webster being diagnosed with testicular cancer, we've had Debbie being diagnosed with dementia, and it's just like, it feels like Coronation Street has just been filled with nothing but doom and gloom since the start of the year. Emmerdale, I wouldn't say Emmerdale's been, too doom and gloom since the start of the year, but Emmerdale, I feel like, as I said, I think the last week of episodes I watched was obviously the Anthony Fox, Anthony Fox storyline. That was the last time I watched, a full week's worth of Emmerdale. I only really tend to watch the Emmerdale clips now and the Emmerdale clips now on YouTube. I can't stand how it's been in Emmerdale at the moment. John Sutton, like, Jesus, one of the most annoying and irritating characters I've ever seen in a soap. I do think it's possible to hate a soap character as much as I do John Sutton. Bloody hell. They just need to end. Emmerdale just needs to end that storyline. They really do. EastEnders, thankfully with EastEnders, there haven't been too many, big characters that have been axed. Obviously this year. The only real big character that's been axed this year, I would say, is obviously well, I wouldn't say that I don't think James Byer was axed. So I just can't really say that, as I think Martin let it was James Byer's own decision to leave. So, I can't really say that he was axed. We know that obviously that they haven't axed Lacey Turner, so it can't really count her either. Obviously we know that both Bernadette and Felix have been axed, but I think you can't really call them major characters. The thing is with Bernie, it's been a long time since he was involved in a major storyline. And Felix has never really been, involved in any major storyline since he arrived, since he came into the show. Like, he's only ever really been a background character, so neither of their exits really do shock me, to be honest. I don't think too many people were shocked by that. With Emmerdale, I'm not saying that Emmerdale's been completely shit, but it's just not been as bad. I feel like it's not, neither Emmerdale or Emmerdale or Horry have been quite as good as EastEnders have been since the start of this year. I think the reason that I've enjoyed, the only character that might be axed, I'm not saying he definitely will be axed, but I'm saying he might be, is Jamie Borthwick. He plays Jay. Obviously, he's been suspended by the BBC because of a disabled slur that he made. Obviously, that he's been suspended for that, and I did see a report thing online the other day saying that he could actually be axed as a result of that. Whether he will definitely be axed or not, I don't know. They're just saying they're just saying that he could be axed, not that he definitely will be axed. So just have to wait and see, I suppose. But I think the reason that I've enjoyed EastEnders a lot more since the start of this year is it feels like, EastEnders hasn't been too depressing since the start of this year. It feels like it hasn't been too sort of doom and gloom. That's just one of the things that I really don't like about Coronation Street at the moment. Is it just feels like it's just too doom and gloom at the moment. Like, it's just too depressing to watch. It's so depressing. That's the reason why it's so, it's just not enjoyable to watch, and I don't enjoy watching it. And watching horror it's just way too depressing. And I don't feel like I'm being harsh. I feel like I'm being brutally honest. I think that, it is way too, Coronation Street is way too depressing. You know, I mean, as I said, going back 4 or 5 years ago, I very rarely missed an episode of horror, but now I find myself very rarely watching horror these days, very rarely watching Emmerdale. The only real time I ever tend to really sort of watch, horror or Emmerdale now is if there's like a major storyline going on, or it's been announced that a major character's or a major character's leaving within that week of episodes, or if a big character is about that's been gone from the show for however many years is about to return in that week. So, is going to be returning within that within that week of episodes, then I would probably watch it. Um, but at the moment, like I just the reason that I'm not really watching horror and Emmerdale at the moment too much at the moment is because I'm just not really a big fan of a lot of the storylines that we're seeing in the show in both shows at the moment. Horror just feels like their storylines are way too doom and gloom. You know, um, and Medal story and some of the storylines we've got in Medal at the moment are absolutely way too annoying, too irritating. It's just that one of the storylines we have in the show at the moment just feels like it needs to bloody end. And I can't be the only one who thinks that. And I'm sure when I say that, a lot of people know which storyline I'm referring to. It probably won't be that hard for Emmerdale fans to figure out what storyline I'm referring to with that one, but with that statement about the storyline that needs to end ASAP, Emmerdale fans should be smart enough to figure out what storyline I'm talking about. Um, that and also the fact I previously mentioned John Sugden, put two and two together. There's your answer. I feel like if Coronation Street wasn't so doom and gloom and it just wasn't so depressing, I would probably watch it more often. But it's like, why would I want to watch a show, a program that's so damn depressing? Why would I want to, why would I want to watch a program that's full of doom and gloom? You know, I'd rather watch something that's more joyful, more exciting, and would obviously put me in a good mood, rather than watch something that's going to to make me feel extremely depressed, which is the problem with Coronation Street. Coronation Street right now is I feel like if I watch Coronation Street, it would make me feel extremely depressed, and I'd rather watch a show that isn't gonna make me feel like that. Um, I mean, obviously, some of you guys might think I'm being a little bit too harsh by saying that Coronation Street's been way too doom and gloom since the start of the year, but you know, I think at the end of the day, I think a lot of people would probably say that. A lot of people probably would say, yes, Coronation Street has been way too depressing since the start of the year, way too doom and gloom since the start of the year as well. Um, I mean, I wouldn't say there's really any characters in Coronation Street that particularly piss me off or I find too irritating, but it's just the doom and gloom stuff. It's just, I can't stand the doom and gloom in it, and how depressing, I can't stand how depressing Coronation Street as a soap actually is right now. You know, I mean, as I said, that's what makes EastEnders that bit more enjoyable to watch is because it's not full of doom and gloom. It's not, it's not a soap that feels it's as a soap, EastEnders doesn't feel extremely depressing right now. Which is how Coronation Street feels. Coronation Street as a soap just feels extremely depressing at this moment in time. Emmerdale. I mean, Emmerdale doesn't really feel it, and it doesn't really feel depressing. It just feels really boring, and it just feels not like unenjoyable to watch. Like there's no interesting storylines that will make me want to watch Emmerdale at the moment. You know, I mean, yeah, maybe things might get a little bit more interesting and more exciting towards the end of the year, but I don't know. Because we don't know what the big, what the big Christmas storyline is going to be for Emmerdale this year. We don't really know what the plan is with that. Um, I kind of have an idea for what I think that the new Christmas, this year's Christmas storyline is going to be for EastEnders. I think that this year's Christmas storyline is going to very heavily feature the new Mitchells. It will probably very heavily feature Barney, Harry, um, Nicola, Teddy, Zach. They'll probably be the characters that are very heavily involved in the Christmas storyline this year for sure. I can't see that it would be that it, that, I don't think it would be focused too much on the Knights this year because they were obviously kind of the main focus point of last year's Christmas episodes alongside the Bills. So then the Bills probably won't be a focus point for it this year. Um, I don't I don't see that the Panasars would be the focus. I don't know. I don't see why the Panasars would be the main focus point. So I think the only answer I would say is probably that it will be the new Mitchells that will be the main focus point of this year's Christmas episodes. Um, I don't know I don't know what Coronation Street's bit of Christmas storyline is going to be this year. I don't. It's hard to say because again, I don't really know. I don't really watch horror, so I feel like if I was watching like Coronation Street and Emmerdale, more regularly, more frequently, it would probably be easier for me to kind of guess what the Christmas storylines are going to be for Horry and Emmerdale this year. But because I don't watch those shows frequently, it's a little bit harder for me to say what Christmas storylines are going to be and who's going to be the main focus point of those Christmas storylines. I feel like maybe the reason it's easier for me to give that answer for EastEnders is purely because I watch EastEnders more often. So it's kind of easier for me to say that I think that the new Mitchells are going to be a big part of this year's Christmas storyline. Alongside Zach as well. So um, there you go. But yeah, just like I want to give my thoughts on that. Do I think we've seen the last of the big horror accents? I don't think we have. The last character I think of Zaxxed was Daniel Brocklebank. I know that he's leaving as part of an issue-based storyline next year. It wasn't recently reported that Jimmy Hartshин, who plays Dev, has returned to filming. So I doubt it'd be too much longer now before we do see Dev Anahan back on screens in Horry as well. Um, I don't think there's any other returns happening this year apart from Eva, who's returning a bit later on this year, probably in the I think she's returning in the autumn. So probably around sometime between September and November she'll be returning. Um, Other than that, there's not really any other big horror returns that are happening this year. Same with Ramadan, there's not really any sort of big returns that have been announced for that. I mean, I respect the fact that Emmerdale decided to bring back Ross, Joe, and Robert. I'm not going to complain on that. I think Emmerdale did the right thing by bringing them back. It's good to see characters like Ross, Joe, and Robert back in the show, especially Robert. And the fact that they've brought the Roberts back permanently as well makes it even better, to be honest. Same with Ross and Joe. I'm glad that their returns were like permanent as well, rather than just brief returns or test stints. I think that would have been a bit of a bummer with Robert as well if like his return was only for like a brief stint. But the fact they've managed to get him back permanently is it's a huge win for Emmerdale. It's a huge plus for them. Um, I mean, it would be nice to see some old characters return for Ori. I feel like that would probably. I think that's one of the things that would probably get me into watching Coronation Street again. Is if they brought back some of the old characters, like maybe, for example, Lloyd Mullaney, maybe Becky McDonald. Would always be, if her return was announced, I would definitely want to watch Ori again. For that, Becky versus Tracy again would be huge. Um, I mean, other than Becky McDonald, there's not really any other like major horror characters I'd want to see come back. That she's the only one that really comes to mind. I've seen theories online. People saying they think that Ardy, as obviously there's the droughts thing going on in Horror next week. People think that Ardy's gonna take droughts and he's gonna hallucinate his mum's Anita. You know, it would be interesting if that happened, but we'll see. But yeah, I really enjoyed this video tonight. What I did my thoughts on that. Have an awesome day and have an awesome night, and I'll see you all for another video tomorrow. Bye bye.